welcome again to everyone. I'm Judy Trompeter. I'm the president of Uptown on the Hill Registered Neighborhood Organization. And our co-sponsors tonight are all of the other registered neighborhood organizations in this general Uptown neighborhood. Their names were on the list of the flyer we posted. We'd also like to thank the hospital for sponsoring this event and the neighborhood restaurants that participated. The District, French for Sugar, The Goods, Liberati, Link Coffee Bar, Marzix, and also Walk Denver as a sponsor. So. The location of the bathrooms, if anybody needs them, you go out to the right and then go left, and there are a whole bunch of them. So, let's see. Our plan for this evening is for us to start the conversation here until about 7. From 7 to 7:30, the neighborhood organizations have questions they would like to ask. 7:30 to 8, we will answer, or we will ask our guests to answer questions that you all might have, and there are cards here. So if you, and pencils, if you would like to write out your question, then various people will pick them up and decide, try to call out the most unusual, or maybe not unusual, but representative questions that you got. So we'll be here until about 8. Why did we organize this event? Well, in June, as you may recall, there was a runoff election, and our friends up here knocked incumbents out of their seats on city council. I think it was a surprise probably to the incumbents and to the rest of the city. But they were unusual events. I mean, that doesn't happen very often, and so we wanted to meet with them and just kind of start finding out some questions, having them answer some questions. So I'll sit down and start asking. And I should introduce our people who are here. Candi CdeBaca is the new city council member from District 9. Hinds, the new city council member from District 10. I've asked them both if it's okay if I call them by their first names, because that will speed up our process here a little bit. And they agreed. So, what made each of you decide to run? Let's start there.
Thank you guys, first of all, for having me, for gathering here. I ran because I am a native of Denver. My family's been in Denver for 5 generations. We are actually longer than that, but we have been part of this community the whole time. And I left Denver for about 6 years and came back to a city that was almost unrecognizable. And in some ways that was a great thing, but in other ways it broke my heart to see the potential that was not being realized here. And so I'm a social worker by training. I did youth development prior to running for office. I ran an organization right up the street on 29th and Downing. I co-founded that when I was 18 years old. It's a 15-year-old organization. And I couldn't continue to promise my kids something that wasn't accurate, that wasn't true. And so I continuously was on the outside as an activist, as an organizer, as a policy person, trying to change things from the outside, and couldn't do it the way that I wanted to. And so this was a lever of power that I thought was worth trying out. And so I ran for office to really help Denver realize the potential that I believe is here.
So my name is Chris Hinds. I'm representing Denver City Council's District 10. So if you're south of Colfax or you live in Uptown, hi. And if you're way far south of Colfax, thanks for coming, I guess. But, so I grew up, I was a runner and a soccer player for most of my life, and I was in a crash on the week of the Democratic National Convention in 2008, so August 26, 2008. And I didn't come here. I went to Denver Health.
As you should have, because they were loving what Thomas said.
Yes, and I saved my life. And
no, that's what they do.
I'm alive thanks to Denver Health. But at any rate, I was already living here in Denver at the time, and so as Councilwoman CdeBaca went away and came back, I didn't go anywhere, yet I woke up and I found that it was an unrecognizable city. And I found that when I woke up, I was paralyzed. So I'm paralyzed from here down T3. So it's spinal cord injury, T3, A to B. You're a medical professional. But I realized that this the system wasn't set up for me, a middle-aged white male with a disability. I mean, obviously the system is very heavily geared towards middle-aged white men, but you too can be a middle-aged white male and get elected apparently. So at any rate, the reason I got active in politics is because I bought a condominium and there were spaces designed and constructed for people with disabilities, and they said, "Oh, you can't park there." And I said, "That doesn't make any sense to me." So I asked the property management company, they said no. I asked the HOA, they said no. I asked the city of Denver if they'd enforce the spaces, they said no. Then I asked my city council person, and he said no. And by then it was 2014, and I partnered up with a woman named Diane Primavera. You may recognize her as our current lieutenant governor. She was a state representative at the time, and we got the law passed in 2014 that strengthened parking for people with disabilities, and Denver said, we're not going to follow that. And I said, what? So we worked on a few more laws, and then in May of 2018, Governor Hickenlooper signed the Hinds Act into law, and I was like, man, if they're going to start naming laws after me as a private citizen, imagine what I could do as an elected official. So you're welcome, here I am.
Well, when I mentioned that the U2 ousted incumbents, there was quite a round of applause. And I'm curious, why do you think you won? Who wants to?
I'll start. I've heard it multiple times just today from people who I've run into in the hallway who said, you outworked the incumbent. And, that was something that I felt like I was doing before running for office. I'm obviously a brown woman. I was a first-generation high school graduate. I founded a nonprofit when I was 18 years old. I did 2 degrees in 5 years. It was my baseline, my standard to have to outwork everybody else just to compete. And so we outworked them, and I think that a lot of the people who live in our district and our city generally feel the same way that we feel. We feel like Denver has so much potential, and we might not be investing in the right way to realize that full potential.
So I would also say the hustle. We did the hustle. Anyway, but also, I mean, we heard a lot of people time and time again saying that they felt like they didn't have a voice. They felt unheard. We really found an awakening. I believe I owe my victory in part to Donald Trump. Because he woke a lot of people up who were really interested in, their kids or their jobs or climbing the corporate ladder, and then they said, whoa, I guess that didn't go the way I was expecting, and so we need to get more politically engaged. And as they tried to get engaged, they felt like they didn't have a voice, and they felt like they didn't even know who their District 10 councilperson was. Particularly up in this area of the district. This is District 9 actually, but this on the north side of District 10, people really felt like they didn't have a voice, and they were frustrated, and they felt like development was happening to the city, and government's supposed to represent the people. You are supposed to have representation. Developers, their express purpose is to enrich their shareholders, right? To make their owners rich. Government's supposed to represent the people, and people are really frustrated, as we've talked time and time again, development is happening to the city, not for the city. And I think that's why I won, is because I was talking to a lot of people and I said, we need to make sure that we are represented, that we have stakeholder engagement, that we have transparency, and you know, we've only been in office 2 months, and I think that we're already showing some transparency in the city that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but I think it's for the best for the city.
Chris mentioned development was an issue. Was that an issue in, when you ran too, or were there others? What were the others?
I think the rising cost of living in Denver was huge, and I think that development layered onto that. I don't necessarily feel like development is a bad thing if it's happening because the community is willing it to happen and willing it to happen in the ways we need it to serve us. I think that Denver's out of control, and I think that what Chris said was that it's happening to us. The development is happening without our input. A lot of the input that is used is artificial, and so I personally recognize that disconnect between what was popping up around me and what people next door to me were saying they wanted to happen.
When you say artificial, what do you mean artificial?
A lot of what we do as far as community engagement in the city is about checking a box off, saying there are, so for example, if I was saying this was a planning meeting and I counted every head in this room and presented something to you all that none of you agreed with, I could still go back and say I got input from 200 people. And so that is not real community engagement, and that's not necessarily reflecting the will of the people, but it's being used to say that the people support what happens in development and what's happening in the city.
Chris, were there other issues that came up when you ran besides development?
Well, yeah, also development. So yes, we were inaugurated July 15th, and I don't know if any of you went. I hope you did, because it was really hot. And we were facing the sun, and it was like an hour and a half, and then we didn't have any water either. They were supposed to be under our chairs. I bring my own chair, so there wasn't any water underneath mine. But there was water 4 feet away, but I didn't want there were cameras there. Anyway, after we got inaugurated, 9 News hauled the 5 of us into an interview, and I was still wiping off sweat as we were getting asked questions. And one of the questions was, I'm finally getting to your question. Well, then I'll just keep going. So one of the questions was, what do you think is the biggest issue facing Denver? And 3 of the 5 new council people said affordability, and I totally respect that. What I said, at least for District 10, is the relationship between land use and transit infrastructure. So that's pretty nerdy, I guess, but really it's nerds. I like to but other people the developers have a clear interest in their plot, but right next to their plots, sidewalks, streets, right-of-ways, and we're struggling with that as a city as we continue to build all these high-rises. So when I said in addition to development, there's also development. Not only are the buildings themselves an issue, it's the lack of attention to the things between the buildings. That really, that's where we all operate. I mean,
People is that most people in our city don't know how government works. We don't know how the different levels of government intersect. We don't know who's responsible for what. We don't even know how the agencies within our local government work. And we don't even know how to get information that we want and need in an efficient way. And so that has also been, I think, part of what's at the root of the other problems that we mentioned, is we're not paying attention, and when we are, we're confused.
So you've been in office since July, and how has it gone? Chris, start.
It's, I just hang out in the office. No one ever comes by. My belly button is clean. I got a lot of time to think about it. It's good. It is a lot of work. A lot of work, and I'm struggling a little, frankly. I don't know if this is televised on Facebook Live, Facebook friends, and it's a lot of work. And I have had one job in the past where my boss said you could work 24/7, 365, and still not get things done. We're struggling with that too, and part of it is when we took office on July 15th, we didn't have anything. We didn't have desks, we didn't have computers, we didn't have phones.
Office.
Yeah. Oh well, we had an office that had a whole bunch of desks in the corner, but she didn't even have an office.
Why didn't you would think there'd be a smooth transition? Why wasn't there?
I will not speculate because that was my first day. But
Yeah.
but it's so part of it was just figuring out what we could and couldn't do. And, what can we buy desks? Oh, you should go through the purchasing process. Well, Liz over here said, just go to IKEA. And after 3 weeks of her saying, just go to IKEA, we went to IKEA and we got desks. And no one complained. But the struggle that we're having right now is making sure that we can communicate with the residents of District 10 and all of Denver, but most importantly for me, District 10. And so we don't know if we have budget to do stuff, and so we're trying to make sure that we can be proactive as opposed to 100% reactive. That's not why I ran for office, is to react to things. Of course, that's part of the job, but I had a vision, and I think people elected me for that vision. And I want to, the struggle is making sure that we can implement that vision. So that's just, I think it's just because we're new and we had setbacks because we just had to get basic things like, even the restroom was not, they had to do construction to the restroom because there was no accessible restroom on the 4th floor, and there was no way for me to get onto the city council dais, so they had to make those changes too.
I think to speak to your question about why there wasn't an easy transition, it's not a system that was, so let me start by saying we all believe in democracy, but our democracy was not founded democratically. And so it wasn't a system that was designed for this free, open, flexible, fluid participation. It's a system that is by design for incumbents. It's a system that is designed to hoard information to make you more valuable or make certain people more valuable. We don't have rules about spending your budget after you lose an election. And so in some offices, hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent between the day they lost and between the day we were sworn in. In our month, less than 30 days, yes. And so there aren't a lot of checks and balances in general, but in a city like ours, that confusion or lack of understanding about how our government works, it also factors into that. We don't have we don't have spaces or people who are trying to make it a smooth transition. We didn't have an office, and we didn't have an office because not all city council members are required or allowed to have an office at the city and county building. That is very strange to me, because you would think that Monday through Wednesday, ideally you want city council members participating in the committees where they're learning about the things they're going to vote on the following Monday. We're not even required to attend all of our committee meetings. We get to pick a couple of committees and attend those, but there's no there are not a lot of mechanisms that are built in to make sure that we're being the best decision makers about what's happening. We also found out in our orientation, which I was surprised to have even that little bit of orientation, we found out that of the 1,000 bills that City Council had voted on in the prior year, less than 10 of them were City Council initiated. We found out when we voted against a contract that we stopped the first contract in probably a decade. There weren't a lot of attempts to change the process, and so doing business as usual to keep people confused, keep people out of the loop, and keep power consolidated.
Including elected officials.
Yes.
Wow. Well, we're depressed. It's a shame, but at least now we know, right? And now we can support you in your efforts. Well, I have more questions and would love to know how you operate each day, but we have to move on to the second part of our. Somebody has a card up there, whoever's gathering up cards for later.
Real quick, for those of you who are curious about what happens day to day, we've been strong advocates of making sure that every single meeting that we're participating in gets casted on Channel 8. So you can follow us day to day through every committee. We've gotten 2 committees that we didn't have before, a charter change committee and a policy committee. Those are both open to the public, and this is where we're talking about how we change our charter, which is our city's constitution. And a lot of the barriers that existed before, you have a council that's ready and willing to start to remove some of those barriers. Policy committee is where people from the outside can come in and tell us what ideas you have about policies we should be making. So follow us, learn, come and visit us, hang out with us.
Are those televised? They weren't a couple weeks ago.
I know, and we got the green light. So now our policy and charter committees are supposed to be televised. So we'll see.
Our first question from a registered neighborhood organization is from Humboldt Street. Where's Tricia? Back there?
Right here.
I think they may have already addressed part of what you're going to ask, but
Yeah, but we'll ask it again anyway. That's great. So Candi, you've raised your concerns about Denver not realizing its potential. For both of you, what are your top 2 or 3 priorities that we need to work on to realize the potential of Denver? Thank you.
So I want to start with 2 kind of overriding principles. Accountability and transparency, as Councilwoman CdeBaca said, but we should also, we should have a system of values. I think that it's important for us as elected officials to have a system of values that we use to guide our principles and make decisions. We've seen, arguably, I would argue that at our federal level we have someone who's leading that maybe isn't using a system of values, and we want to make sure that we have a moral compass. So that said, housing and transportation are the top 2 issues facing Denver. Housing, as in we all need access. So at my campaign I said we all need access. We all need access to housing, transportation, and representation. The first 2 were what I wanted to do with the city, and the third was why change. But housing and transportation, so we've made the change, so let's talk about the first 2. Housing and transportation is in, we need affordable housing, and that's part of the conversation right now is that we're building a lot of market rate housing. We're building a lot of housing that doesn't appear to be able to withstand time, which is, I think, cautious. That's a very, kind way to say it. And we have people who have no housing at all, and so we need to make sure that we're building housing that is across the spectrum so that everyone has a home. And And we've been talking about, this is budget season right now for us and city council, and so we've been talking about that and how we as a city have been talking, we've prioritized housing as a budget. You don't see that as much. So, and then transportation, the conversation for transportation is a little bit different in one side of District 10 versus the other side of District 10. So if you live in Cherry Creek, then the transportation conversation is a lot about parking. We want to make sure that we have access to parking. And I think everywhere in the city, I mean, that's a conversation too, but we're expecting an additional 200,000 people to move to the city of Denver by 2040. And we can't fit another 200,000 cars in our streets or in our parking spaces. And so most of the other areas of District 10 in Cap Hill, people can't afford cars because they're 60+% millennials and they can't, they're saddled with student loan debt, and so they can't afford a car. And then in Congress Park, people are a little older, a little more mature, and they've made the conscious choice to give up their car because it's the right thing to do for our planet, and it's good for physical health, and it's good for community because then we meet one another instead of being in our little ivory throne of our single occupant vehicles. So housing and transportation are the top two issues, and obviously I could talk all night, but I guess you own the floor, so.
I don't disagree with housing and transportation being at the top. Those were two pieces of my platform, and I think the values that underlie my approach to housing and transportation are really equity and ecological sustainability. I think that right now there's no shortage of housing the way you would be led to believe there is. We have over 20,000 vacant luxury units, and it's about deciding what we want, what we're allowing to be built, and who's allowed to live there. And so I think that for me, those are my issue areas. I want to see us build a city that all of us can afford, and I want to see us build a city that is where transportation is cheap, fast, reliable, accessible. But I mostly want to make my position a teaching opportunity to eliminate some of that confusion that I mentioned earlier, because whether I win again or not in 4 years, I want people in our city to be paying attention so that we can take our government into our own hands. I believe in co-governance, and we've set up a structure that doesn't allow people to participate to the level that we should be participating. And so I want to make sure to lift all that fog in my next 4 years so that we understand exactly what the targets are, what we need to change, and how to do it. That way whoever steps into this position in the future will know exactly where to begin. Right now, to the other question, it has been a challenge for us to step into these offices because there's been such an incredible backlog of things that have, or constituent needs that have not been addressed, or issues that have been raised and not addressed properly or fully. And so we're catching up from the backlog, and that is always going to be the barrier to being visionary. And I don't want us to continuously put ourselves in that position of catch-up. I want us to be able to thrive and be visionary in what we're doing, and that's going to require a lot more people paying attention and taking action.
The next question is Curtis Park Neighborhood Association. If you have a question, fill out a card.
Where do I get a card?
Okay.
Trompeter, President of Curtis Park Neighbors. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks for having me.
And so homelessness. And I want to first start this question by, this is by no means coming from an NB perspective, because Curtis Park Neighbors in the downtown area have been.
I just want to be sure people can hear you. Speak up.
Okay, so this is not coming from a NIMBY perspective. This is Curtis Park Neighbors and Curtis Park 5 Points area has been housing and helping the homeless population for decades. Much of the affordable housing is actually found in Curtis Park. This is a massive problem. And we want focus not on that tent popped up, you know, putting out fire after fire after fire. What does 5 years down the road look like? We want to work with you. We want to be partners in solving this and being the first city to solve this. So you did touch on affordable already, so I'll leave that out of here, but home specifically.
I think that there, like I mentioned earlier, there's no shortage of housing. We have some cognitive dissonance. We're saying we want something and we're not really taking the action to make it happen. There shouldn't be 20,000 vacant units with a point in time count that says 600 people are on the street, 600 people on the street, but we know there are thousands of people on the street. Those two things should not exist in the same world. And so we need to figure out how to make that not happen. What I think we're already doing on the campaign trail, we said over and over that there should be a 24-hour shelter. We don't have a 24-hour shelter in the city of Denver. And so when people stay in a shelter overnight, they're woken up early in the morning and kicked out of the shelter or bussed downtown or somewhere else. Then we police them all day long while they're waiting for the shelter to open back up so they can go into the shelter. And so if we're going to tell people to move along, one, we need a place for them to move along to. If we're going to tell people they shouldn't live on the streets, then two, we need to make housing accessible for everybody. And so there's not a single solution. There's not a magic bullet. We all live in an inner city. This is where resources were concentrated. Many of the shelters predate some of our neighbors. And so when you move into an area that has the concentration of resources here, we have to acknowledge what we signed up for in the beginning. And so I don't think that moving shelters out to the periphery makes sense either. I think that we have to recognize that people who are not housed are also our neighbors. People who are not housed are also my constituents. Public space is for the public. Whether you're housed, jobless, black, brown, poor, or whatever. This is about our values. And we have to have a real conversation about that, because right now we're talking about scooters in public space. A corporation literally just dropped scooters into the public space without a fee, without being told to move along. But we also don't want people who don't have houses to monopolize public space either. And so we need, well, now we have some leadership on council that's willing to push back and say, listen, we have to put some responsibility on the shoulders of people who can absorb that responsibility. We have to recognize that we have basically given our city away to corporations without them paying their fair share of all of the range of things we need, from transportation to housing to pollution, all of those things. And so it's going to take a while for us to chip away at that sense of entitlement that some people have in this city in order for us to spread out that burden and make sure we meet our needs. At the state level, we have a state with laws that don't allow us to meet our needs of a growing state. And so at the city, we've de-bruised in some ways, but we still need to understand that we have to push back on what we are building and who it is for. And so I'm committed to seeing the shelter, the 24-hour shelter through. I would like to see us doing wraparound service types of shelters where we have the social workers who are moving people into permanent housing. But that permanent housing piece means we have to be more innovative with accessory dwelling units, with co-housing, group living, community land trusts. All of those things require us to change, make little tweaks in our laws, and we need support from you all to do that.
Do you have anything to add, Chris, or should we?
No, I do actually. I have one other thing. Most of my advocacy was at the state level, and right now there is there's a prohibition for affordable housing, and rent control. Not that there's a prohibition for affordable housing, but there's a prohibition for rent control, which is affecting our ability to provide affordable housing. So there's this.
And there's a prohibition on demanding affordable housing.
Right. This is where I'm going. So there's a state law that was about rent control that was taken to the Supreme Court, or the state Supreme Court in 2000. It's called the Telluride decision, because the city of Telluride tried to, in a new development, tried to force a development to install workforce housing, because Telluride's a small place and their workers didn't have a place to live, and so the developer sued the city of Telluride, and it turns out that the Colorado State Supreme Court said the Telluride decision in the year 2000 requiring a developer to put in affordable housing as a form of rent control, and so it is not allowed at all by state law. And so I've already started the conversation with our state counterparts about, so Senator Gonzalez, who's my state senator, Judy Gonzalez, she was the one who carried, or who sponsored the rent control bill last year that didn't pass. She was talking about the classic definition of rent control as in a property manager or a property owner can only raise the rent by so much a year. And certainly that's an interesting conversation, but another conversation of removing this Telluride decision is, I think, more palatable even to people who are too conservative to believe in the idea of rent control. And so what that would give the city of Denver is the ability to say, all developers, if you're putting in new housing, you all have to put in 10% affordable housing. And that levels the playing field, because right now, there's some developers who want to do the right thing, and there's some developers who want to maximize profitability. And so the developers who are want to do the right thing, they get fewer investors. They get higher interest rates because the risk is higher, the reward is lower. And so removing the Telluride decision would allow us greater flexibility and will allow us to say, everyone in Denver, you have to put in 10% affordable housing. Right now, they're saying you have to put in affordable housing. We're paying into a fund. Everyone's paying into the fund, so we're not getting affordable housing.
And the fund, I don't know if you all know about the linkage fee, but the linkage fee is between 66 cents and $1.06, I believe, per square foot. And that, I mean, there are rolls of fabric that are more expensive than that, and we're not generating even what it was designed to generate. It was designed to generate 15 million. I believe in its first year, it didn't generate over 10, and that was at the height of our development. And so right now, we have the message from the mayor that we need to be preparing for an economic downturn, and we didn't even collect what we could have at the height of our development. And so those are some things that we can look into switching now.
Or even more importantly, we didn't collect affordable housing.
The next question is from Old San Rafael Neighborhood Organization.
Hi. I'll face this way, but my question is for you so everybody can hear me. I'm Reed Reynolds, president of the Old San Rafael Neighborhood Organization. This question is about working with registered neighborhood organizations. From time to time, issues arise in our neighborhood where we would like your help. Help with gaining more information, help with contacting some branch of city government, or help with advocating for us. Sometimes we feel these issues are urgent, sometimes not. Sometimes we feel these issues are really big, sometimes not. Would you tell us your thoughts about the best way that we can work with you and your staff to address the range of issues that concern us? How should we reach out to you? What should we expect regarding you and your staff's time to respond to us and meet with us? Thank you.
So let me preface this by saying that everybody always wants us to address their urgent issue in the and our district, there's more than 70,000 people in District 9, and the day we signed up for our email or activated our email, we had hundreds of emails that came in the day we activated. And so that hole that we were digging out of, I don't see us catching up very, very soon, because every day there's a new issue that layers on. One of the things that I recognize as an organizer is super important to neighborhood organizations, but have recognized is not helpful, is hundreds of emails on the same issue. While that is super important when I'm making a decision and I can say I have 100 of these emails on this issue, I think that there's a more efficient way to get me those 100 testimonials rather than putting them in the inbox, because we can't see in the inbox when those are all exactly the same issue. And so if somebody could we talked to one neighborhood organization that was willing to collect things in a Google folder or a Google spreadsheet and then present that to us. That was more helpful, especially with the short turnaround for voting. We get about 14 days notice before we vote on something. And so if there was more efficient ways for RNOs to be that middleman to organize what it is you're trying to get us to digest very quickly, that would be helpful. And so with urgent issues, we have priorities in our office. We have a vision, we have a mission, and we're trying to make sure that we're dealing with the life-threatening issues first. We have some categories. We're gonna publicize those on our website, hopefully in the next month or two when we get our website up and running. But recognize that everybody wants the same attention as quickly as you want it. And so there literally are life and death issues happening in our district. And I need your information on what you want me to vote on, but I also need to deal with the life and death issues first. And so I'll be transparent about that. And Lisa and Carrie and I have outlined an entire year's calendar where we're dedicating, we have 12 neighborhoods. We're dedicating a month to each neighborhood so that we can get all the RNOs in that particular neighborhood to hopefully meet together. If not, we'll spend that month specifically highlighting that neighborhood and catering to that neighborhood so that you guys don't so you also get your own dedicated month of our time for some of your issues. I think that'll help us plan for the future of things that we want to do, but we're also just digesting a lot very quickly every day with very limited support.
Yeah, so there are 15,000 employees in the city of Denver, as I understand. In the District 10 office, we have 4, including me. And I think all of city council is a total of 50. So one of the things that is a challenge is that people look to the legislative branch, as in the two of us, and to fix things in the executive branch. And so that's a bit of a challenge for us. I mean, certainly my job is to go to bat for you, right? So I'm not trying to say that that's, I mean, we're representing the people. We're supposed to represent the people. Our job is to advocate. We are advocating on your behalf. We can't tell people what to do. They can just ignore us if they want, which is kind of a challenge. We have 23 RNOs and bids in District 10. The vast majority of them meet monthly. Many of them also have committees, often a zoning committee and a historic preservation committee. And so, I mean, we have at least 50 monthly meetings that occur. And so what we've been trying to do is go to those RNO meetings. And I don't know if we've hit, well, we certainly haven't made every meeting, but there's another neighborhood meeting right now that we're covering. So the 7th Avenue Neighborhood Association, if you watch this, you know, say hi to Galia. That, you know, so we're doing our best to be proactive and actually be engaged where you are, as opposed to asking you to come to us. Some of the challenge is we get information from the RNO. We also get information from the people who are in the RNO. And so we want to make sure that, that the RNOs are theoretically representative of the neighbors, right? I mean, that's the hope, that's the goal. And we want to make sure that everyone feels heard. And if RNOs represent the neighbors, then that's great. If they don't, maybe we can help you help us. And I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. That is a conversation. So let's have it right now. No, I'm just kidding. We can whip it up in the next 4 or 5 minutes, right? But I think that's one way that we can be successful with RNOs is to help you. If there should be tweaks. I don't think we've looked at the RNO structure and how it interacts with the city in quite some time. We have a gentleman right here who's instrumental in the creation of the relationship between RNOs and the city. So, I wonder if I don't know, but I wonder if we should have a conversation to see if there are tweaks to make RNO 2.0 even better so that it represents everyone in the city.
Is that 7:30 up there?
Yes.
Okay.
Was it time to stop? So,
No, that means that we're supposed to go to questions. Where are people who are gathering up questions?
I have some. You want me to just read them instead of, it might be easier that way, or?
Are they on different topics?
Yes, and I can kind of relate a couple of
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
And
let's-
if you want to read them all, maybe we can oh.
that'll be 30 minutes.
How
So
many are there? Well, I only have about 7 or 8
Oh,
here.
okay.
I got another 10 or so.
Another 10?
I think you should just pick a couple of good ones.
Okay, well, so there's a couple different, there's topics, solutions to corruption, budgets, scooters on sidewalks, neighborhood needs.
No scooters on sidewalks. We just passed a law.
Yeah, scooters started killed riders and injured riders and bystanders, and then scoot impossible to police. That's what that means. Please, let's ban scooters. So, what are the solutions to alternative transportation types? Because as you are talking about, Denverites don't all have cars, and we have intersections that are maybe more or less safe for pedestrians, or these alternative forms of transportation. So, what do you all see, kind of the vision for that going forward?
So I believe strongly that we have to all have the freedom to get from A to B and feel safe while doing it. Freedom and safety and access, I think, are I talked about. We should have guiding values. Those are really critical to me, and I would love to be the part of the Denver that breaks Denver's dependence on cars. So we've got a lot of busted and broken sidewalks in District 10. We, in District 9, not to speak for the councilwoman, but we have a lot of places where there are no sidewalks at all. And if sidewalks are our most equitable form of transit. You don't have to own a car. You can, getting down the sidewalk is, you don't need anything other than, yourself. And so I think we need to fix our busted and broken sidewalks. 10% of Denver has no sidewalk at all, and another 30% of Denver has sidewalks narrower than 4 feet wide. And that's not even, not wide enough for a wheelchair. Who cares about people in wheelchairs anyway? But
in our current budget plans, it'll take us over 200 years to get all the sidewalks that we need.
Yeah, we need to fix our sidewalks. We need to put in a protected bike lane network. And I feel strongly about protected bike lanes. Because again, freedom, safety, and access, we should all feel safe as we go from A to B. And protected bike lanes are the way to do it. And once we have those sidewalks and those protected bike lanes, then we don't have people walking in the streets. Or parents pushing their kids in strollers in the streets. Or we don't have scooters on the sidewalk because we have a protected bike lane. And bikes and scooters go about the same speed. So let's have pedestrians on the sidewalk, let's have scooters and bikes in the bike lane, and let's have cars on the street, and buses and mass transit. So at some point, we also should have an education about, we should all recognize that we're people, we're all trying to get from A to B, and we need to reset our expectations on transit and make sure that we respect the rules. The rules are in place for a reason. And so, you know, one group says those car folks, they blow through red lights or stop signs or they don't yield. And the same could be said for scooter riders or cyclists that ride on the sidewalk for half a block and then are in the street for half a block and then they're in the crosswalk for half a block. And,
just ask the scooter and the bike rider that got into a fight at Cheeseman Park last night.
So I think that we need to, the city has a program right now that if you find a pothole in the road, which the road's right away, it will be patched within 72 hours. Meanwhile, we have sidewalks, also are right away, that haven't been fixed in 72 years. So we want to, if, again, we can't fit another 200,000 cars on our streets or in our parking, we've got to think beyond the car and using that guiding principle of freedom, safety, and access. If we give pedestrians a dedicated place, a safe place to go, and scooters and bikes a safe place to go, and cars a safe place to go, it's going to take some time, it's going to take some money, but we're in budget season right now, so this is the right time to do it.
I won't harp on that. I agree with all of it.
All right, how about a question?
Sure. Okay, so the Sheriff Department is a large public safety organization. Any such organization or business requires strong professional leadership. An elected official may not provide this experienced leadership. Why do you support changing this structure?
An elected official is already providing the leadership, just not the one that's responsible for that department. So you have an elected mayor appointing someone who doesn't necessarily have the expertise to run that department. And we used to have an elected sheriff. Yes, there absolutely is challenges when you think about elections, because historically, the people who get elected are the people who have the most money behind them. Our races proved that people are awakening to that and making different decisions. My hope is that we start to have a conversation about what the status quo has gotten us. We've been reforming our sheriff's department for over 8 years now. We've thrown millions of dollars at the reforms in our sheriff's department, yet we continue to hemorrhage millions of dollars in lawsuit settlements because of the failure of that department. And so at this point, I don't particularly trust the way that this has worked, and I think that we need to try something different. And so if this starts a conversation that leads us to a better idea, I'm open to it, but we have to have a difficult conversation right now about the status quo not working.
You want to add anything?
And they have in our public safety department, which is our biggest department as far as budget goes, they are the smallest budget in comparison to fire, police. And when you think about it, the sheriff's department is responsible for people in our care and custody. And so it's a bigger liability when we're not devoting resources and training and accountability to the department that's responsible for people who are actually already in our care and custody. And so I think we need a paradigm shift there, especially with the recent settlement about discrimination in the department. There doesn't seem to be any real long-term efforts to mitigate that discrimination in a meaningful way.
I guess just to add, the clerk and recorder is an elected position, right? And the clerk and recorder was a very close race. And I don't really want to necessarily go into that race because that's a whole different conversation. But the two candidates that ended up making the runoff were very different. I mean, one really good at understanding the ways of the city, and the other one was really good at understanding what the job of a clerk and recorder is. And so do we want someone who has the relationships and knows how to work with the city, or do we want someone who who knows the role inside and out, we get to decide that as voters. And maybe the sheriff that is picked by the mayor, maybe that's not who we want. And so, I mean, I think it's right. I think it's good that we have a conversation and we make sure that we have something that works for the city and for those who are in our care. And I mean, it's up to you to decide whether you think that those in our care are getting cared for. But you know, it's certainly been in the news a lot.
I think it also connects to the other question about how do we address or reduce some of the corruption in our city government. When you look at the way that the structure is, that there's so much consolidated power. We have only a few elected bodies, and those elected bodies have to go to the executive branch to even develop our budgets. And so when you're trying to reduce chances for that corruption, it makes more sense to create participation and more layers of accountability. We have a home rule city, which is already like a reduction in checks and balances. We don't have county commissioners to keep us in check as city council. We don't have the same kind of power as other councils in other cities to keep the mayor accountable. And so the more accountability we can create, the better equipped we are to deal with corruption.
And also home rule, sometimes the mayor uses to opt us out of state law too, which again has even a further concentration of power.
Did you want to ask one of them?
Sure. I have two about housing, and so there's one about short-term housing and then about kind of renters' rights. So the short-term housing is about, you know, what's the relationship between housing costs and short-term rentals and advocacy landlords, and what is the current legal status of short-term rentals, and then are there barriers or restrictions to short-term rentals? So we're talking about VRBO, things like that. But then the other question is, currently it is the law that a renter can demand a copy of their lease and the landlord must provide it. However, it does not need to be in a language they understand. The same is true for other notices. I have seen our neighbors who only speak Spanish or French being taken advantage of. Can a law be passed to address this injustice? Kind of those two sides of housing.
Renter protections has been something that community's been working on for a few years now. And I think that we have enough members on council to try and implement some of those renter protections. With the short-term rentals, it's complex because you're required to have a permit for a short-term rental, but unless you have neighbors policing short-term rentals, you can kind of get away with operating a short-term rental without a permit. We have a unique scenario here because we have some unintended consequences from legalized marijuana. When the banks couldn't, or when the industry groups couldn't bank federally, the quickest way to basically launder money, clean your money, is to put it into real estate. And so I think we have an unusual amount of short-term rentals and vacant units because of legalization, but we don't have anybody studying that or tracking that. And so we need to invest in figuring out a way to study it and know what we're dealing with. But we also need to empower residents to know what are the rules around short-term rentals. What recourse do you have when you think that there's one that's being operated without a permit, or when you think there are violations on one with a permit that you want to be addressed? So it's about letting people know what you can do, because there is somewhat of a mechanism in place to protect us. It is exacerbating our housing issue, our housing crisis. But it's private property that we've already put these mechanisms in place to say, do what you want with it. And so I think that that's a bigger conversation, and it is part of those vacant units. And with an economic downturn, I don't know if they will survive. I don't know if it's more profitable to rent your house in a long-term fashion than it would be in a short-term fashion during an economic downturn. So it might correct itself.
So there's, well, I want to thank you, the voters, because you voted, you elected some, the state of Colorado spoke strongly at the state level in November of 2018, and our Colorado House of Representatives and Colorado House, our Senate, have really been doing some strong movement on renter protection. So Colorado has historically been a very landlord-centric state, and just this past legislative session, I think at least 4 tenant protection bills were passed to the state legislature. One example, there was a law that required 72 hours notice before you could evict someone, and the 72 hours, you could tell someone on Friday that they're getting evicted on Monday because it's 72 hours, not 72 business hours. And the person could, might not have access to their bank or access to, services to get the money for the rent or whatever. And now I think that the deadline or the amount of time is 10 days as opposed to 72 hours. But what also is happening at the state level, and we're federal level, state is subservient to the federal level, the local level is subservient to the state level in many cases. Now that these bills are getting passed at the state level, that's giving us more control at the local level to give additional tenant protections. And the pendulum has been very heavily on the landlord side, and we are now a majority renter city for the first time in a long time. It's and it's not a large majority, but it's still a majority. And so I know David Zebedos, who ended up not getting elected to council, he said one of his he was running for council. One of his big statements was he would have been the only renter on council, and we just don't have that representation. And so. So that's something that certainly we need to be aware of and sensitive to as a body on city council.
And warranted habitability.
Mm-hmm.
There are other state protections for renters about habitability and being able to demand livable, clean, safe spaces. Some of those things, hopefully, we can find funding to enforce at the local level. But a lot of this does require some extra dollars for support to make sure that tenants have access to fighting back when those situations do happen.
Do we have? Yeah, there's.
I keep popping out. What are your plans for helping seniors with different programs in the neighborhood?
There was a budget request today from City Council to expand the budget for the Office on Aging. Seniors are near and dear to my heart. I was raised by my grandma and great-grandma and had to, as a 14-year-old, navigate those services for her. And so I recognize how complicated it is and how impossible it sometimes will feel for our seniors to get the services they need. Our 311 doesn't do a great job of it. Our 211 with Mile High United Way doesn't do a great job of it. And so that first step is expanding the budget for the Office on Aging so that we can get somebody to pull together the resources that exist. There's some nonprofits that try to do it themselves, but even in our senior housing right up the street, the resource people there don't have all the connections they need to get seniors what they need. So I would love to make sure that we're investing in it and streamlining those processes. RTD is a big beast that we have to work with to make sure that seniors have opportunities to get to their doctor's appointments, to get to the things that they need to and can't do without a car. So those are some of the stuff I would like to look into. We're trying to put together an elders council in District 9. So if you know anybody who wants to participate or want to participate yourself, we need some help building that out.
Anything to add, Chris?
I guess one other thing that I would say is the 1 and 2 seniors 65 and older have a disability, and so I did a lot of disability advocacy, and that's certainly something that I want to. We've worked together with the Colorado Senior Lobby and at the state level. I'm very interested in making sure that we have access for everyone. I mean, that's what I kept saying in the campaign is we all need access. And so, and I don't mean to harp on our sidewalks. Our sidewalks are pretty bad. Even as an athlete, pre-crash, one of my top three injuries ever was running, and then there was a crack in the sidewalk, and I tripped, and it was pretty bad. I lost the toenail on my big toe, and so when I talk about how we all need access, I really mean all of us. And I happen to be kind of the least common denominator. If I can get down the sidewalk, and if someone with a vision impairment can get down the sidewalk, then anyone can. And so, particularly in District 10 with our challenges for mobility, I think that's a huge thing for seniors, even if, for everyone, but including seniors, even if you're just trying to get around the block, which is, it's good to get out and exercise. If you are afraid that you're going to trip and fall and break something major, then that's not access.
One more thing that is tangential but really important to aging in place is dealing with the rise in property taxes. That is one of the destabilizing forces in our elder community. And if anybody here knows anyone or has ideas about how we build some capacity around creating a loan fund, a no interest or low interest loan fund to help our seniors access the rebates, the senior property tax rebates, those are very complicated benefits because you have to have the dollars to pay it in order to get your dollars back later. And so for seniors who don't have the income to pay the taxes, it's not a helpful program or support. And so we're trying to figure out how do we help seniors take advantage of what exists while we also explore ways to stabilize those property taxes for seniors.
And that sounds goofy that they have to pay it to get it right back, but that's the state law right now, that it's the law that we have to collect the taxes. We can give it back if we want, but that's the goofy part.
Are you talking property taxes? Mm-hmm. I could have sworn that qualifying in that category you're talking about, that the bill comes and it's already been taken off.
So there's two levels. There's your senior property tax exemption, and then there's the senior property tax and low income property tax rebates. And so for any rebates, it's not helpful for a low income person because if you don't have the money, you don't have the money.
And there is an exemption as well. That's a smaller program. Okay. And then if you don't qualify for it, you're over a certain income, you can still qualify for a rebate.
Okay. Do you have a?
Yeah, I think I have another one that's kind of related. Candy, you were talking about a handful of bills were passed, but they did not originate in City Council. Where did they originate? And is there a way for us to help with these bills, start them up, or how can we kind of get involved in them?
Well, Chris actually highlighted a couple of them, and they originate at the state level, primarily because of the way our state has been set up to favor landlords. A lot of the advocacy at the state level is necessary to enable us at the local level to address things in a meaningful way. Colorado Homes for All, the Renters Roundtable, there are a few different advocacy groups that have been working on the renter protections. Reach out to UNE, United for a New Economy. They've been one of the leaders at the table, and I think at the Renters Roundtable, is Aubrey with Colorado Coalition for Homeless?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
CCH.
Yeah.
Okay. Where is our questioner over here? She'll pop in.
Sorry. Okay. have a couple that are similar topics. So the city charter does not allow for housing with more than 7 units to have city compost and recycling service. How do we change the charter, or is there another way to accommodate? And then another related question is, how can we in general improve Denver's recycling program?
So, who's from EcoCycle here? Who put that up?
Right.
Yeah. All right, anonymous. Don't say Guy Fawkes masks either. It is. I'm not sure exactly what the history is behind the number 7. It's my lucky number, but I was born on the 7th. But it seems like a really strange number for us to have this arbitrary distinction between what is provided by the city and what is not provided by the city. So this coming election, we get to vote on Proposition CC, which is about Tabor, and it's asking voters if the state can keep the property taxes, keep the taxes collected by Tabor. Forget property. I don't know why I said that. But City Council unanimously endorsed Proposition CC. But basically, kind of what it does is it debruces is the more technical term, but it allows.
No, it complies with Tabor.
Yeah.
It does exactly what Tabor is asking us to do, which is, can't we collected these taxes? Can we keep these taxes to serve our state?
Instead of with the voters' permission, of course.
Yes.
So how does this have to do with EcoCycle? So what I'm getting, or pay as you throw, or 7, magic number 7. We can, as a city, as a workaround, make sure that the rules for 7 or fewer units are the same as 8 or more units. And I think it's really frustrating that I live in a building with 141 units, and we have trash and recycling. We don't have composting. There are other places that just have trash and no recycling or composting. And apartment complexes really aren't encouraged at all to do anything but trash. And so there are ways that we can favor the 1 to 7. We can change that so that because if you have a single family home or up to 7 units, the city provides your trash services, and we as a city can change so that we have trash, recycling, and composting. That isn't, in District 10, we have a lot of apartments, and we have a lot of high-rise buildings, and so for Uptown, Capitol Hill, Golden Triangle, and Cheeseman, it's not going to do much because most people live in multi-unit homes. So I think to Anonymous, wherever you are, I think that is a very good point where we should make sure that we provide something throughout the entire city, because as I've said several times on council, climate change is real, and this is one of the most impactful ways that we can, as individuals, do our part to save the planet.
I have to insert something because it's not a popular opinion, and I just want to throw it out there. 50% of our waste is generated by construction and demolition, and we have no requirements around recycling, construction and demolition in the city. And so only a small slice, I think it's 12% or 14% of our waste is generated by us, by residences. And so while I think it's super important to recycle and to invest in that how we can, I think we've come up with some counterintuitive solutions for the urban core. Our private trash cans are really a suburban solution, in my opinion. And I think we're watching our city get increasingly dirty because there are not public trash receptacles unless you're in a space that's part of a business improvement district where they pay for it themselves. And so I think that we shouldn't be trying to privatize trash or privatize recycling or privatize composting. I think that's good behavior, and it should be available for free for everybody in expanded ways. I do think we need to take some more unpopular positions with our construction and demolition industry to make sure that they're carrying their fair share of the burden, since they are the biggest generators. I also think that when it comes to our trash and privatization of trash, I think that we need to invest in having public receptacles. It's expensive, but it's what's gonna keep our city clean, and we're not doing that right now, and we're trying to densify, but when you densify, even in neighborhoods that, you know, have the trash cans, you have to add more trash cans. And we already have people complaining about multi-unit alleys where there aren't places to put all of the trash cans. And so those are things that we need to grapple with when it comes to recycling and composting and having a whole alley full of them. Is that the right solution? Is that the direction we want to go deeper down?
Now, I'm going to do a slight correction. It's not 50%, it's 49%.
Round up.
Just to be clear.
Well, our time is up tonight, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming. It's the start of our conversation with our newly elected representatives, and we'd like to thank them for what they did.